underemployed, or on furlough. Think about this. First of all, the cost of keeping people out of work, the benefits which have to be paid to support people. Think about the lack of tax which is being paid, and most importantly, think about how much additional wealth our country could have if those people had what they wanted, which was proper, long-term, permanent, well-paid jobs. And at the same time, there's nearly £1 trillion of cash lying in the bank's accounts of big companies. Here's the thing. Why not have a country which, instead of spending money keeping people out of work or underemployed, those people will put to work delivering a better country where, instead of people working for big wealth was made to work for our people. It's a simple idea. Full employment, full productive employment. Transform our country, build a green economy, build up our caring services. This is what we should be about.
Hello everybody, I'm Nadia Jama, Labour NEC member, and I'm delighted to see you all at this event jointly hosted by No Holding Back, The Morning Star and Arise. We're live streaming over a number of platforms, and today's theme is a jobs-led recovery, the fight for full employment. And what a great start with a video there from John. You know, big wealth made to work for people. The economic crisis we now face is set to be the worst any of us have experienced. Part of the economic crisis is millions of people's living standards being hit, and another central part is the growing unemployment. The event today is not only to argue that fight is to prevent also the soaring unemployment, because that's paramount, and we need to argue for an alternative. So we've got some fantastic speakers lined up for you, and we'll go straight to our first speaker, who is Larry Elliot. So Larry is the economics editor for The Guardian and has been a leading voice speaking out against the disaster of austerity over the last decade. So over to you, Larry.
Thank you very much indeed. It's a really great pleasure to be here. Clearly, the situation with the economy is quite desperate. We've had the biggest contraction in 300 years in 2020. The furlough has actually helped suppress what would have otherwise already been mass unemployment. Had it not been for the furlough, we would have seen unemployment rates probably of around 15%. As it is, it's probably going to peak at a lower level than that, but there's still going to be an awful lot of distress and an awful lot of hardship caused as the economy opens up and as a lot of businesses that have been kept on life support go to the wall. So we're not out of this by any means yet, and it's quite obvious to me that there needs to be a strategy and a plan for creating the sort of full employment society that we want that we want on the left. And so let me just run through what I think we need to do from a sort of big picture point of view. The first thing, and it's absolutely pivotal, it probably sounds a little bit self-evident, is that we need to make the case, we need to make the intellectual case for full employment and re-establish it as the central pillar of economic policy, as it was in the first 3.5 decades after the Second World War. Up until the moment the Mrs. Thatcher government got into power in 1979, full employment was the absolute top aim of economic policy. And the events of the 1970s somehow made the left lose its confidence in its own arguments, so that by the 1990s and the early 2000s, the left had accepted, or large parts of the Labour government accepted, that combating inflation was the priority rather than full employment. So I think, first of all, the left needs to be prepared to have an argument, an intellectual argument, to make the case for full employment, as it did in the 1930s and in the 1940s, when full employment was enshrined in the in the Employment Act of wartime. So that's the first thing. The second thing that we know is that you can get unemployment down a long way without creating very much inflation. All the evidence of the last 2 or 3 decades is that you can push a long way and get quite a lot of stimulus into the economy without there being very much inflation. Throughout the 1990s, 2000, 2010, central banks have fretted all the time about, you know, when inflation is going to take off, and it never does. So my second point is we need to get the macroeconomic situation right, and that means having a different way of running both the Bank of England and the Treasury. So if you look at what the Americans do with their central bank, the Federal Reserve, that has a dual mandate. It's not just there to keep inflation down, it's there to ensure that employment stays high. So what the left should be arguing for, in my view, is a dual mandate for the Bank of England so that it takes employment and unemployment as seriously as it does inflation. The third thing, and this is something that's become evident over the last year, is that, you know, the Treasury, when it wants to, can borrow large amounts of money without there being any really serious impact on interest rates or on bond yields. So, you know, one of the sort of neuralgic fears of the right has always been that if the government borrows money, then interest rates go up and higher public investment crowds out private investment. Now, everything that we've learned in the last 12 months is, you know, record amount of borrowing in peacetime. The amount of money the government is paying, the interest rate the government's paying on that debt is incredibly low. So the government can borrow long term at very low interest rates for productive purposes. So that's a sort of bedrock of where we need to be. But we need to understand that that's just a necessary but not sufficient remedy for full employment. You know, because other thing that we know about the UK economy is that if you just pump up demand, what happens is you get a consumer-led, housing-led spurt of activity, which quickly runs into balance of payments constraints. You know, Britain has not got a problem with spending money it hasn't got. What we actually have lacked over many, many decades is an investment-led strategy which puts money into productive enterprises and gives people good, well-paid, secure jobs. So the third thing that we need to do, after having the argument and getting the macro position right, is to concentrate heavily on getting investment into those parts of the economy that need them. Now, that's going to have to be a mixture of public investment and private investment. That needs to be using a mixture of government pump priming, procurement, and tax policy in order to get investment into those parts of the economy that need it. Now, I'm a member of the Green New Deal group, and one of our ideas has been to use some of the money that the Bank of England has been creating through its QE program as a form of green quantitative easing, push the investment into those parts of Britain that need jobs, put it into retrofitting people's homes, get local people to actually start work using government money to actually make their homes more energy efficient. Now, that seems to me and my colleagues to be an updated version of what happened in the 1930s, when governments did become more active in the face of the Great Depression. Governments did actually realise that full employment was necessary. So that's the next step. The final step I think we need to be prepared to think about is the power of organised labour, because one of the big changes that we've seen over the last 30 or 40 years is that you can get quite low levels of unemployment, you get quite high levels of employment, but what sort of employment are you getting? Where are all the productivity gains from the growth going? And haven't been going to workers, haven't been going to labour, they've been going to capital, and that has actually led to a suboptimal economy where wages have been suppressed, productivity has been low because businesses have not been really incentivized to invest more because they know they can always pick up loads of cheap labour. So those are the broad principles I think we need to think. We have the argument, get the Bank of England with a dual mandate, get the Treasury to understand that we can borrow long-term at very low interest rates, get the investment back into industry and build up our manufacturing base, have a Green New Deal, and give more power back to organised labour. That's broadly how I would envisage a new and better path forward for Britain. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Larry. Great big picture there. Thank you for summarising as well. So I just remind people that there will be a Q&A at the end of today's session. So please put forward any questions and we'll be putting those to the panel. Okay, so we'll move on to our next guest. So everyone will be, I'm sure, familiar with Grace Blakely, the economics correspondent for the Tribune, host of the World to Win podcast and author of The Corona Crash. So over to you, Grace.
Thanks so much, Nadia. As John observed when I joined the call, I am wearing my green jumper in support of the Green New Deal. So I hope everyone appreciates the thought that clearly went into that. Definitely not a coincidence. So I want to talk today a bit about the challenges I think we're going to face after the lockdown, and why a Green New Deal is going to be really kind of the only solution that we're going to have to be organising to win. So I think, the biggest threat that we're really going to be facing after this lockdown is going to be rising inequality. And I think there are a number of reasons for this, a number of different drivers that are going to be feeding into this trend. So first, we've seen that better off people have been able to save quite a lot of money over the course of lockdown. So this is kind of professionals who've largely kept their jobs, been able to work from home, perhaps kind of kept their incomes at the same levels that they've been used to for quite some time, but they've seen their costs, so the cost of living for going out, etc., fall quite a lot. So if you look at the graph of the UK savings ratio, it's quite low, and we've seen for quite some time now actually households kind of dis-saving, so dipping into their savings because they haven't been able to kind of make ends meet, and it suddenly goes whoosh right through the roof. But that is highly unequally distributed, because the second driver that goes alongside this rising savings amongst the better off is that many people have experienced the opposite problem. So they've seen their incomes fall, and perhaps also their cost of living rise. So this could be, for example, workers who've been pushed into unemployment, people who've been forced to take sick pay, who've been forced to try and find other, perhaps, lower paying jobs in different sectors because of that unemployment. Many of them